Welcome to the Low Demand Parenting Podcast, where we drop the pressure, find the joy, and thrive, even when it feels like life is stuck on level 12 hard. I'm Amanda Diekman, author, autistic adult, and mom of 3. I'm not here as an expert, but a fellow traveler. Together, we're learning how to live more gently, authentically, and vibrantly in this wild parenting life. In our episode today, we're going to talk about burnout, neurodivergent burnout, autistic burnout. The focus here is on your kids, but everything we're going to talk about would apply to you too if you, the parent, are in burnout. We're going to talk about the 4 key steps for navigating this incredibly difficult season. I hope that this helps you and your loved ones. I do want to mention here that I have a new course that is just coming out in early 2025. I'm so excited to be bringing this to you. It's called Aligning with Yourself. And it would be so helpful for any of you who are navigating a season of burnout. This will particularly help if you are a perfectionist or a recovering perfectionist. You just can't stop thinking about how this was all supposed to go and feeling like you're failing and falling short as a parent. This course is about letting go of that whole narrative, that story you're telling yourself that you're not doing a good job, and about standing tall in your own truth, in your own power. I promise that it will help you as you advocate for your child and as you learn to live well in this new season. You can find more information about it in the show notes. It would be such an honor to support you in this way. Burnout does a real number on our identity as parents. I want to start with all of the junk that you have likely heard from people you love, from people on the internet, from books, from helpful therapists. Let's get into some of the misconceptions about burnout. Misconception number 1, they just need more discipline. And it comes with all of its cousins and its derivations. You're just not strict enough. You need more boundaries. You are lazy. You are permissive. It might be judgment on you as a parent. It might be judgment on your techniques. They just need more structure, more routine, more sensory. If only you did enough, they'd be fine. Burnout is not a lack of discipline or a lack of trying. Burnout is not a failure to do enough. That is a lie. Here's the real truth. We've already tried that. We tried being stricter and having a routine and a visual schedule. We've tried consistency. What happens is that these efforts backfire. They exacerbate stress and meltdowns. They make things worse. And so we are trying so hard to make it better based on expert opinions, and it's all worse. And it can lead to extreme aggression, self-harm. And I just want to say it here in case any of you are living this, it can also lead to suicidality. When we enter into a kid who is in burnout and we say, you just need more, it can make a kid feel like it's not worth living. Misconception number 2, they just need to push through it. This usually comes with some sort of judgment about your kid. Your kid is just so sensitive and you're coddling them and they think they're a sensitive flower and they need to get everything that they want. If they just push through, they'd find out that it's not so bad. And this idea that just a push, just try. If the kid tried harder, then they could get out of it. And here's the lie here. Pushing and trying harder is what led to the burnout in the first place. That is what got you here. It is not going to get you out. It is not your magic ticket to somehow get your kid to push more. In fact, it's the opposite. We're going to get to that. Misconception number 3, it's just anxiety. Or it's just depression. Our kids deserve complexity here. especially from their mental health experts. This one really upsets me because anxiety and depression are such important pieces of the puzzle, and we need to hold them with the tenderness and care and nuance and complexity that they deserve. While underlying anxiety is often a factor in leading to a kid having such a sensitive nervous system, having difficulty engaging in different environments, it is often a risk factor for burnout, but it is not the cause. Depression is one of the most risky outcomes for burnout. Burnout, if improperly treated, almost always leads to depression. So, anxiety and depression are a part of the picture, but burnout is not the same. And most importantly, we do not treat burnout with the same techniques as we do to treat anxiety or depression. If you are focusing on pushing your kid into a treatment modality that is taking anxiety and depression as the main causes, it will also make burnout worse, which is so maddening that the thing that you are trying so hard to bring in for healing is actually contributing to the problem. The last misconception that I have to mention, and I think that this underlies all of the other three, is it's bad parenting. Or the way you might internalize that, it's my fault. Here's the truth, my loves. Burnout is a physiological, neurological response to overwhelming demands. It is not your fault. You didn't cause this, no matter what mistakes you may have made. And believe me, you made mistakes because you're human and because this shit is hard. And so, of course, you did. But no matter what mistakes you made, you didn't cause this. And beating yourself up or being around people who beat you up or blame you is getting in the way of your healing. So first, step one is what is not, and kicking that stuff to the curb. Step two is to know what burnout is. The core features of autistic burnout, and this applies to burnout across the lifespan. So if you are an adult thinking, I think I might be in burnout, and it's also beginning to be characterized more broadly as neurodivergent burnout, which it deserves because neurodivergence is such a rich and complex community that we don't want to just isolate like only autistic people can experience this. No, not at all. But most of the studies have been done on autistic adults. So sometimes when I'm referring to the research, I'll call it autistic burnout. If you feel like you're in burnout and this applies to you, then claim it. It's yours. So there are three core features. One is pervasive exhaustion. Now, for adults, exhaustion usually looks like needing to rest, brain fog, deep fatigue, sleepiness. For kids, exhaustion looks different. It might look like exhaustion to the point that your kid can't play anymore. Kids' primary vocation is play. So they may be unable to play, or they may be unable to play in a fluid and flexible way. Their play gets more and more rigid and specific. You might see that the number of can'ts that they're experiencing is going up. They can't go to school. They can't show up for therapy. They can't be put to bed by anyone but you. They can't speak kindly anymore. All that comes out is sharp and biting. And that is a sign of their exhaustion, actually. So that's number one. Number two is a loss of skills. This is different than there's too little butter spread over too much bread, or this cup is cracked at the bottom and no matter what I pour into it, it just falls out. The loss of skills can be particular and specific. Here, one of my kids is getting on Gorilla Tag, and that's a loud thing. I'm going to go close the door for him. I love that. Gorilla Tag. Any other active VR people out there? Kids, adults? That's my kid's favorite thing. So first is exhaustion. Second is loss of skills. So this might look like an inability to speak when speech came naturally before, or a drastic shift in speech patterns. This might look like an inability to put yourself to sleep, needing tons of co-regulation and support at bedtime, or insomnia, or reverse cycling where you're awake all night and asleep all day. It might look like a loss of emotional regulation skills where your child is exploding at the drop of the hat. That's probably one of the most characteristic for kids in burnout. You might see executive functioning skills be lost. So whereas your kid used to be able to follow 3-step instructions, now it's like they just can't. If you give them more than one piece of information, they are no longer processing. Oftentimes, you'll see a loss of skills related to basic needs, regardless of how old the kid is. So it seems like only toddler might have some toileting regression, but no, we see this in elementary school age kids. We see it in high schoolers. It's amazing the way that all of our body systems are interconnected. So your kid may not be able to stay dry at night anymore. They may be no longer able to poop on the toilet, even though they're well into their elementary school years. You're not alone. You're not crazy. This is real. These are the kinds of skills that our kids lose the ability to execute on a number of different levels. And the third core feature is increased sensory sensitivities. This is going to be particularly true for autistic people who fall on that hypersensitive end of the spectrum, but we know that sensory sensitivity crosses the neurodivergent spectrum, but this is going to be a sensitization. So it may be that your kid was fine eating at the table before, and now they're complaining about how loudly you're chewing. It may be that your kid is screaming at you for the way you breathe, or they're asking for all the lights to be off. They may be instantly overwhelmed by certain stimuli like touch or fabrics. Again, they're not making it up. This is absolutely real. So those are the 3 core features of what burnout is. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the data that we have on burnout. Autistic burnout lasts for at least 3 months, and I'll say in my experience, typically 6 months to a year and beyond is the length. So we're going to talk some about what that means, because if you're like, it's been going on for days or weeks, I get it. It feels an eternity. And also, you're still at the beginning. So it's a good time to know what this is and what it's going to look like so you can buckle up for the ride that you're on. Burnout leads to long-term changes in sensory and social stimuli, which means that regardless of your age, you may not, in fact, likely will not leave burnout the same way you came in. It leaves marks on our lives. There are signs of what we've been through. And that may bring up grief, but as I'll talk about, it can be a key towards freedom. We're going to talk about the path out of burnout. There are real physical, mental, psychological stressors that contribute to burnout. To understand the path forward, you often need to get a full picture of all the things that led you here. I've worked with dozens of families that have had all their own specific factors. It could be that underlying mental health challenges were a significant factor. Then the path forward might look like targeted medications to put the fire out so that your kid can begin the process of healing. It could be a dietary related co-occurring condition, maybe a reaction to neurotoxins, allergens, inflammagens, gut imbalances. Then the path forward may look like using low demand strategies to work with an excellent understanding nutritionist to slowly make the kind of changes that you need to restore health to your kid. It could be a chronic reaction to illness like PANS or PANDAS. If you haven't heard of those things, I've got links in the show notes. It can be related to exposures in the physical environment, like an environmental toxin, mold, or a chronic illness called SIRS. If you think you might be living in a water-damaged home or be exposed to mold, this can absolutely be a factor in burnout. And it can absolutely be connected to trauma and ongoing exposure to trauma triggers. It may be a trauma that you know about, and it may be one that you don't. Getting all of that understanding takes time. I'm assuming that you are working on all of these different levels because I know you guys and I know you are. So how do you heal in light of the complexity? So then what do we do? The thing I want you to know is that for your kid, considering what they are experiencing in their body and in their brain and in their social world, burnout makes sense. It all makes sense. Megan Anna Neff talks about a burnout equation in her workbooks on burnout, which are excellent, mostly focused on adults, but can absolutely translate across the lifespan. When demands, expectations, sensory, social, and physical stressors exceed the ability and support, burnout happens. So what we're going to do is take as much as we can off the demands. We're going to remove everything we can. There will be some things you can't take off. Like maybe your kid just cannot change their diet right now, and you know that's a core factor. Or you know you're living in a moldy house and you cannot move. And so you're going to do everything you can to take off all of the demands that you can at the same time as you raise supports and create an environment for healing where your child's innate capacity grows. One more piece. Burnout is transformation. Your child that emerges from burnout is not the same kid that goes in. And yes, there will be grief around this, but also this is a key to understanding what this portal is seeking to do in your life. I think about burnout as a healing cocoon. Your kid crawls into it like a caterpillar. And what happens inside of that chrysalis is the caterpillar turns into goo. They literally disintegrate into nah. But from that goo, that is the rebuilding form for the butterfly to emerge. Your kid needs you to wrap them up in this cocoon, in safety and in love. I cannot emphasize the importance of this enough. You are allowed to embrace this season. You don't have to hate it. You don't have to fear it. Yes, it's so painful and it destroys your heart to look at your kids suffering. But what you can do is wrap them up in safety and signal to them in every way you know how that this is okay, that you are here for this, and that what comes out on the other side is the real kid. In some ways, it's when you start living. The low demand environment that you create in that chrysalis is an environment where they can grow. You're making a cozy nest for the transformation to happen. And then you're watching to see who comes out. And how do I love that kid? Not the one that I thought they were or the one that they were before. Step 3 is to know your tools. And here, if you want to go deeper, I wrote a book. You're welcome to access that. And it walks you through the low demand approach. But I want to highlight a few specific pieces of low demand that are so essential in burnout. First is to know what matters. That's where this healing cocoon mindset comes in. Naming what this season is about for your child. For me, at the very first, I wanted us to survive. And there were times where it felt like that was on the line. Eventually, we were able to settle into acceptance. I wanted my kid to know every day, every breath, I see you, I love you, just like this. That became my what matters. I see you, I love you, just like this. The second piece that I want to highlight is to drop demands wholeheartedly. Now, we talk a lot about dropping demands and low demand method. The piece here that is so essential is that deep inner work for you to release the underlying belief that is generating the demand. So we talk about demands as a layer cake. The demand is really just the surface. Underneath it is some sort of an expectation that you have, and below that is an adult need that's generating the demand, or a need for your child that's generating the demand. Your kids need so much space to heal, and they sense our energy and our emotion intuitively. And so on their sensing level, they are asking, am I okay? Are you disappointed in me? Am I messing this up? Am I bad? Has something awful happened to me? And that's where you drop demands in order to give them a gift. They need as much genuine love and acceptance as they can get in this season so that they can do the real healing work. Then it's the practical stuff. What do you want to let go of for good so that your home space can be as cozy and restful and encouraging of this deep work that they're doing? Oh, Dad to go to soccer. Yeah, you can come in.
I really need water.
Some water? Water!
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Recovery from burnout looks different for everyone. For some, it might look like extensive rest. For others, it might look like focusing on a really intense special interest. It might look like maintaining very strict routines. It might look like eating one food over and over again. And then systemic changes like considering school, your daily structures, your work, your partner's work, where you live, who you have access to for support. There are so many structural shifts that end up happening for every family. And some of those things are devastatingly hard and leave lasting impacts. But I want you to know that you're not the only one doing it and that it is a necessary part of the process. It's like looking around and, okay, in light of this cozy cocoon, what else do I need to change so that we can show up for this? So let's talk about the stages of burnout recovery. Stage 1 is typically the screens all day stage. Every kid I have known who has gone through burnout has had some version of this. It may be books all day, it may be staring out the window all day, it may be swinging all day, but it is some sort of intensely regulating activity that they immerse themselves in for a long time. Many kids retreat into these kinds of activities and they're seeking safety and comfort. They're seeking autonomy and they're seeking connection, but on their terms in a way that they can access. This is, I think, the most misunderstood phase. You get people talking about addiction. You get people talking about permissive parenting and how all the wrong stuff we talked about at the top always comes in this phase. And this is crucial. This is the first stage of healing where they sink into the deepest part of the cocoon. This is the goo. This is where they turn into the goo. Stage 2, I call this curious but no capacity. Think of this as one step forward, 2 steps back. This is typically the hardest phase for parents. I'm just going to tell you. Eventually, screens all day, you sink into it. And there can be, at the end, when you look back on it, almost a nostalgia for that phase of, it was sweet. We just all sat in our rooms and we did our own thing. And it was pretty quiet and peaceful. When you really let screens all day live, it turns into a comfortable phase. And then something shifts and your kid is suddenly, they're bringing you their tablet and they're like, I watched this on here. I want to do it. Or suddenly they're like, I saw a kid, this happened to us, riding a BMX bike. And suddenly your kid is, I want to build an entire BMX track on our downtown tiny postage stamp lot. And you're like, curious, but lacking capacity. Those skills haven't come back online yet. All that stuff that they lost in burnout is still gone. So they don't really have the ability to understand what's fact and what's fiction, what's realistic and what's not. Phase 2 is so hard. Your nervous system is likely finding this the most challenging stage because it's such a shift. And it brings in all of this vulnerability. It leads to more public meltdowns. It leads to navigating more systems because now your kid wants to go to a trampoline park, but they can't really handle it. And so they melt out. This is where you become the butterfly. This is where you go from goo to new human. You're going to start advocating. You're going to start naming stuff. You're going to start getting brave and bold. You are going to become the parent that this kid needs in this phase. And you may need to do some trauma healing or nervous system regulation to be able to become that kind of parent. You're going to encourage their exploration, but you don't push them to more than they can handle. You expect the meltdowns. You expect the brain that can't process things. That, of course, that's the phase that we're in. Stage 3 is growing capacity to meet the challenges. And this is where you begin to look like healing. So over time, your child's energy and capacity will grow. There'll begin to be some moments of alignment. This is not like it all happens. You're like, whoa, for 5 minutes, you were able to have an idea and execute that idea with no meltdowns. Crazy. Or you're still melting down, but you're melting down much more safely. Like you're going to your room to melt down, or you're melting down and then choosing a tool. That is what this growing capacity starts to look like. And you piece together moment by moment. I promise you, they start to string together. And suddenly you're like, that was a good hour. And then that was a good half a day. And then a good day. And then a good week. It happens. It does. I can hold this hope for you. At this stage, it's so important to respect your kids' capacity and their pacing and allow them a gradual return to challenges in a safe and manageable way. This is where you're going to get really proactive in shifting environments. Maybe they're ready to go back to school, or maybe they're ready for more structured learning, or maybe they want to build new friendships. And you're going to start to research like, okay, where's a social club that's all about Pokemon where it's okay if they have a meltdown? Because you're going to support them in unmasking. This is where you shift from a ground crawler life to an air flyer life. You don't have a caterpillar anymore. You have a butterfly. And this kid is likely much less masking, much higher sensory sensitivities. You're going to help them to set and maintain their own boundaries. So that's going to look like teaching them how to say no. And then you honor their no. It's hugely important. And you're also going to teach them self-advocacy, how to speak up for themselves, how to name their own needs in public places. And that is a genuine, full-fledged, multi-tiered, layered healing journey from burnout. If this podcast is speaking to your soul, you can subscribe through wherever you get your own podcasts. Even better, if you feel the nudge, head on over to Apple Podcasts in particular and leave us a review. It's such a helpful way for new people to also get to experience what this podcast wants to bring into their lives. I'm Amanda. Remember, it takes great strength to let things go. I'll see you next week.